British war films weren't all stiff uniforms and noble speeches. Some of them pulled directly from the most daring missions ever carried out in real life. Raids planned in the shadows, agents dropped into hostile territory, and commandos expected never to return. These weren't just stories, they were survival bets written in fire. But which films captured that audacity best? Let's dive into the forgotten missions that Britain turned into unforgettable cinema. Ill Met, by Moonlight 1957. Imagine sneaking into Nazi-occupied Crete under cover of darkness, armed with nothing but wits, disguises, and a desperate plan. That's the story behind Ill Met by Moonlight, a film that recreates the audacious SOE mission to kidnap German General Heinrich Krype. Directed by Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, the film follows Patrick Leigh Fermor and his ragtag band of resistance fighters as they pull off one of the war's most improbable captures. Powell and Pressburger shot much of the film on location, lending a rugged authenticity. You can almost smell the dust of Crete and feel the constant tension of every roadblock the team bluffed their way through while transporting their prisoner across hostile terrain. Dirk Bogarde plays Fermor with that mix of charm and cold resolve that made him one of Britain's most compelling screen presences. What sets the film apart isn't just its accuracy, though Fermor himself consulted on the project, but its refusal to romanticize. The mission wasn't clean, and it wasn't guaranteed. One slip, and the entire resistance network in Crete could have been obliterated, yet they made it, spiriting the general away to a waiting boat. Audiences in 1957 watched in disbelief that such a scheme had ever been attempted, let alone pulled off. It's not just a film, it's a reminder that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones history quietly confirms. Carve Her Name with Pride, 1958. Some heroes don't carry rifles. They carry forged papers, coded messages, and nerves of steel. Carve Her Name with Pride tells the extraordinary story of Violette Sabo, one of the most courageous SOE agents to operate in occupied France. Played with striking intensity by Virginia McKenna, Szabo is portrayed not as an action caricature, but as a young woman balancing grief, motherhood, and a dangerous double life. The film tracks her recruitment, her training, and ultimately her mission to sabotage German operations in France. It doesn't shy away from the harsh realities either. Captured after a firefight, Szabo endured brutal imprisonment, yet she never revealed her secrets. That quiet strength forms the film's backbone, making it less about spectacle and more about character. McKenna delivers one of her finest performances, bringing dignity and raw humanity to a role that could have been reduced to patriotic myth-making. Director Lewis Gilbert insisted on grounding the story with realism, and it shows in every sequence. The French countryside feels lived in, tense, and dangerous. By the end, when the title's meaning becomes heartbreakingly clear, you realize this isn't just a war drama, it's a tribute to one of the most remarkable women Britain ever sent behind enemy lines. Forget James Bond, Violette Sabo was the real deal, and this film makes sure you never forget her. Odette, 1950. Before Violette Sabo, there was Odette Sansom, another SOE agent whose story defies belief. Odette was one of the first British films to tackle the true exploits of the Special Operations Executive, and it set the standard for all that followed. Anna Neagle steps into the role, portraying Odette not as a fantasy heroine, but as an ordinary woman who agreed to do extraordinary things. The film captures her recruitment, her missions in occupied France, and the terrifying reality of being hunted by the Gestapo. Director Herbert Wilcox focused on stark realism. Instead of swelling orchestras and romantic heroics, you get claustrophobic interiors, tense interrogations, and a portrayal of capture that feels alarmingly close to documentary. What makes Odette unforgettable is its courage in showing vulnerability. Odette isn't superhuman. She's frightened, battered, and yet utterly defiant. The real Odette Sansom was involved in the production, ensuring that details weren't glossed over. That stamp of authenticity makes every frame hit harder. Critics at the time praised the film for refusing to glamorize espionage. It wasn't about gadgets or fantasy adventures. It was about ordinary courage, meeting impossible odds. Today, Odette stands as one of the earliest and strongest reminders that Britain's secret war wasn't fought by faceless shadows. It was carried out by real people with everything to lose. They Who Dare 1954. If you think desert raids sound like comic book fantasy, They Who Dare is here to remind you just how perilous they really were. The film dramatizes the SAS-style missions against Axis airfields in North Africa, where small teams of commandos were tasked with destroying enemy aircraft under the blazing sun and constant threat of patrols. Dirk Bogarde stars as the officer leading the operation, and the film leans heavily on atmosphere. Long, blistering treks across unforgiving desert landscapes give way to sudden bursts of action as the team infiltrates enemy airstrips under cover of night. It's not glamorous. It's sweaty, desperate, and dangerous. Director Lewis Milestone ensured the film captured the tension of waiting as much as the thrill of striking. In many ways, the silences are louder than the explosions. You can feel the exhaustion creeping in, the men barely clinging to their resolve as the desert itself becomes as dangerous as their target. While it didn't make the splash of bigger war epics, They Who Dare deserves recognition for putting the SAS style of warfare on screen at a time when much of their real history was still shrouded in secrecy. It's a film that shows you just how thin the line was between daring and doomed. The Guns of Navarone, 1961. Okay, this one bends the rules, it's technically fiction, but it's rooted so deeply in the real commando raids of the Aegean that it earns its spot. The Guns of Navarone became a worldwide hit, but behind the Hollywood gloss lies a distinctly British tale of impossible missions and improbable survival. Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Anthony Quinn star as members of a commando team sent to destroy massive German gun emplacements threatening Allied naval routes. The story may have been invented by novelist Alistair MacLean, but the tactics, the setting, and the desperate stakes were inspired by actual British raids on Greek islands during the war. Shot in spectacular Mediterranean locations, the film combines old-fashioned adventure with a gritty sense of danger. The tension isn't just about whether they'll succeed, but whether they can even survive the trek across the island. The characters bicker, crack under pressure, and make costly mistakes. In other words, they feel human. Audiences loved it, critics applauded it, and it set the template for dozens of commando films that followed. While the guns themselves may have been fiction, the spirit of desperate raids against impossible odds was very real. Sometimes fiction can tell the truth louder than history books. The Heroes of Telemark, 1965. Some missions were so vital they could change the course of the war. The Heroes of Telemark dramatizes the legendary sabotage in Norway, where resistance fighters and SOE trained operatives destroyed heavy water facilities crucial to the German nuclear program. Richard Harris and Kirk Douglas headline. But despite the Hollywood faces, this is a story built from very real danger. The film captures the brutal winter terrain of Norway. Snowstorms, frozen rivers, and sheer cliffs weren't background scenery. They were as much the enemy as the guards, protecting the plant. Director Anthony Mann leans into that harshness. You can almost feel the icy wind cutting through the screen. Every footstep in the snow feels like it might echo too loud. Every crossing of a frozen lake feels like a gamble. What makes the Heroes of Telemark so gripping is its realism. The actual saboteurs risked everything on skis, navigating terrain that even seasoned locals struggled with. The film doesn't shy away from the personal cost either. The heroes aren't Cape Supermen. They're people torn between loyalty to country and love for their families. It's part thriller, part survival tale, and all built on one of the most daring operations ever carried out in occupied Europe. History remembers it as a turning point. The film ensures you feel the stakes in every frostbitten frame. Sea of Sand, 1958. When you think of desert warfare, you might picture tanks. But Sea of Sand puts the spotlight on the long-range desert group, the forerunners of the SAS, who operated deep behind enemy lines. Starring Michael Craig and John Gregson, the film shows a small patrol tasked with knocking out fuel supplies, a mission where survival is as much about endurance as firepower. The authenticity is striking. Director Guy Green shot in Libya's real desert, and it shows. The blistering landscapes swallow men whole, reducing them to parched lips, sunburned skin, and haunted eyes. The action sequences are sharp, but the film is at its best in the long silences, men staring into endless dunes, knowing one wrong turn means death. What sets Sea of Sand apart is its honesty. These weren't glamorous operations. They were fragile gambles carried out by exhausted men with limited supplies. The film highlights the teamwork and the unspoken bonds that made such missions even possible. It may not have the polish of later epics, but Sea of Sand feels grounded, almost documentary-like. For anyone curious how Britain's desert raiders really operated, this is one of the closest glimpses you'll get on screen. The Secret Invasion 1964. Here's one you probably didn't expect. The Secret Invasion takes a looser approach, but still roots itself in the kind of commando raids organized by British intelligence. The premise? 5 convicts recruited for a mission into Yugoslavia, each promised freedom if they succeed. It's like an early blueprint for the Dirty Dozen, but with a distinctly British flair. Director Roger Corman, better known for his low-budget thrillers, leans hard into the grit. The landscapes are rugged, the stakes high, and the sense of expendability hangs over every character. While the specifics may be fictionalized, the core idea echoes real SOE improvisations, missions where desperate times called for desperate measures, and unconventional recruits were sometimes thrown into the mix. The film thrives on its tension between the convicts and their handlers. They're not polished soldiers, they're flawed, selfish, sometimes reckless. And yet, that roughness makes them unpredictable enough to succeed where others might fail. Critics at the time dismissed it as pulpy, but there's something fascinating in how it captures the improvisational chaos of behind-the-lines missions. Not every raid followed the rulebook. The Secret Invasion reminds us that sometimes the most unlikely candidates were the only ones left to try. Play Dirty 1969. If you thought British war films were all noble speeches and flag-waving, Play Dirty exists to smash that illusion. Michael Caine stars as a reluctant officer forced to lead a unit of mercenaries on a sabotage mission across the desert. The catch? They're expendable, and the mission itself is a decoy. From the start, director André de Toth makes it clear this isn't about glory. The desert is punishing, the men are bitter, and trust is non-existent. The realism is searing. The cast actually filmed in the blistering heat of Almería, Spain, where temperatures soared past 100 degrees. The sweat and exhaustion on screen are not makeup tricks, they're real. What makes Play Dirty unforgettable is its ending. Just when you think these misfits might pull it off, they're betrayed not by the enemy, but by their own side. It's brutal, cynical, and deeply unsettling. Critics at the time were shocked, some calling it too bleak, but looking back, it feels ahead of its time. Play Dirty bridges the gap between old-fashioned adventure films and the grittier, more questioning war cinema of the 1970 seconds. It strips away the comforting myths and leaves you with something raw. It may not make you cheer, but it'll leave you thinking long after the credits roll. Operation Crossbow 1965. Some missions weren't about raids or kidnappings. They were about stopping new threats before they could strike. Operation Crossbow dives into the Allied efforts to sabotage and destroy the sites where Germany was developing rocket technology. George Peppard and Sophia Loren headline. But beneath the star power lies a film built on real intelligence operations. The story takes viewers into a world of spies, infiltrators, and saboteurs. Engineers slip into enemy territory, disguised as loyal workers, only to risk discovery at every turn. Director Michael Anderson balances spy thriller intrigue with explosive sabotage sequences, creating a film that feels equal parts James Bond and historical drama. What makes it compelling is the scale. These weren't just commando raids. They were desperate attempts to halt projects that, if successful, could have rained destruction on British cities. The film doesn't flinch from showing the high cost of failure, nor the razor-thin line between success and catastrophe. While critics debated its Hollywood gloss, there's no denying that Operation Crossbow shines a light on one of the war's lesser-known but critical battles, the secret war against technology that could have rewritten history. The Silent Enemy 1958. Forget tanks and paratroopers. The Silent Enemy dives beneath the waves, dramatizing the true exploits of Lionel Buster Crabbe, Britain's famed naval diver. While Italian frogmen were wreaking havoc with limpet mines in Gibraltar, Crabbe and his team raced to counter them underwater. The film pulls you into a rarely seen theater of war where the battles were silent, claustrophobic, and deadly. Shot with remarkable authenticity, The underwater sequences feel raw and real, thanks to direction from William Fairchild. Lawrence Harvey plays Crab, giving him a stoic calm that feels miles away from the usual stiff upper lip cliches. Instead of glory charges, you get tense dives in pitch-black waters where a single slip could mean catastrophe. What makes The Silent Enemy so memorable is its focus on an unsung battlefield. These divers weren't charging across beaches. They were disarming explosives in suffocating darkness, often by touch alone. It's less about explosions and more about the nerve-shredding anticipation of not knowing what waits below. The film was praised for its realism at the time, and even today, it stands out as one of Britain's most unique war dramas. It's a reminder that not all wars were fought where you could see the enemy. Sometimes, the deadliest threats lurked beneath the surface. Submarine Zone 1968. Miniature submarines. A raid on a battleship. And the kind of mission where odds of return were practically zero. Submarine X-1 fictionalizes but closely echoes the real Royal Navy X-craft raid against the mighty Tirpitz, one of the boldest naval operations of the war. James Caan plays the commander tasked with leading a team of men in tiny, claustrophobic craft. The film leans heavily on authenticity. Actual X-class submarines were used in filming, and the cramped sets recreate the bone-tight pressure of life inside. Director William Graham didn't settle for studio tricks. The cast endured Scotland's freezing locks to mimic Norwegian fjords. The result is a film that balances suspense with historical weight. It isn't about grand speeches. It's about men crawling into glorified tin cans, armed with little more than nerve, and steering them into near-suicidal missions. Critics at the time overlooked it in favor of bigger, flashier submarine films, but Submarine X-1 has since earned respect from naval historians. It shows that sometimes the biggest risks were taken not with fleets, but with a handful of men willing to disappear beneath the waves. The One That Got Away, 1957. Here's a twist. A British war film that tells the story of the enemy. The One That Got Away follows Franz von Vera, the only German POW to successfully escape from British captivity. On paper, it's his story. But beneath the surface, it's also about Britain's own security efforts, the networks of guards, and the tightening grip of MI5 and SOE. Hardy Kruger gives a magnetic performance as Von Vera, turning what could have been a villain role into a compelling portrait of sheer determination. The film isn't propaganda. Instead, it's fascinated with how far one man will go to regain freedom, and how the British system responded to the challenge. The tension comes not from big battles, but from small details. A guard distracted for a moment, a forged document passed with a shaky hand, a desperate leap into freezing waters. Director Roy Ward Baker treats it like a thriller, and it works. Though told from the perspective of the other side, The One That Got Away became a quiet hit. It shows that even in war, the stories worth telling aren't always about who won, but about how razor-thin the margins really were. Attack on the Iron Coast, 1968. Take a daring raid, give it a naval twist, and you get Attack on the Iron Coast. Loosely based on real combined operations missions, it tells the story of a British officer leading a suicide strike on a heavily fortified enemy port. Lloyd Bridges stars, and while the production leaned into adventure, the bones of the story reflect real raids. Desperate, improvised, and nearly impossible. Director Paul Wenkos makes smart use of tight ship interiors and stormy seas, giving the film a constant churn of tension. What makes it stand out is its tone. Unlike some of the grittier entries on this list, Attack on the Iron Coast leans into spectacle. Explosions are big, heroics louder, but beneath that sheen lies a story drawn from Britain's real-life commando raids, where success often meant catastrophic losses. Critics brushed it off as Saturday matinee fare, but in truth, it keeps alive the spirit of those raids, audacity, improvisation, and the willingness to throw everything into one desperate gamble. Sometimes history doesn't need polish, it just needs to be remembered. The Cockleshell Heroes, 1955. If one film epitomizes daring real operations, it's the Cockleshell Heroes. Based on Operation Frankton, the audacious commando raid where Royal Marines paddled canoes, yes, canoes, into occupied Bordeaux. It tells a story so improbable that many audiences assumed it had to be fiction. Yet the raid really happened, and its impact was legendary. Directed by and starring Jose Ferrer, the film dives into the grit and sheer ingenuity of the men who volunteered for what was essentially a one-way mission. These weren't superheroes. They were ordinary Marines trained to perform the extraordinary, navigating treacherous waters with fragile craft and relying on discipline, stamina, and raw courage. The movie painstakingly recreates the hazardous river journey, the bone-numbing cold of winter nights, and the sheer exhaustion of paddling mile after mile under constant threat of discovery. But the Cockleshell Heroes isn't just about action. It acknowledges the human cost. Of the 12 commandos who set out, only 2 survived the mission. That sobering statistic gives the film a haunting weight, reminding viewers that behind every daring victory lay staggering sacrifice. When it premiered in 1955, audiences were left stunned by the sheer boldness of the tale, while critics praised the respectful yet gripping portrayal. Decades later, the film still stands tall as one of Britain's definitive commando dramas, a cinematic reminder that sometimes truth outpaces imagination. So there you have it, 15 British war films that turned real, near-impossible missions into unforgettable cinema. From canoes in Bordeaux to submarines under the fjords, these weren't Hollywood fantasies. They were slices of history, sharpened for the screen. Which of these daring ops impressed you most? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe, and keep watching, because history's boldest missions still deserve the spotlight.